Namaskar everybody. I'm so delighted that I am with you, with Professor Patnaik, with Professor Anuradha and all of you to address this issue of Sanskrit and the arts in the present world, or rather in the present situation in India. Now, the tone has been set in some ways by my friend Patnaik here, that the two traditions are very rich, that of the East and that of the West, and we have to study, respect and take the best benefit from both. That said, what is very important is to remember that we belong to one tradition. We are that tradition, we live that tradition. And so, whenever we talk about that tradition, we did not feel any guilt that we are putting it at a premium. Everybody puts what he or she is at a premium. That is the swabhava. And so if in my talk today you see a bit of that swabhava, so forgive me, because that has become my swabhava, so to speak, over all these years. So now to the subject. You see, your center is doing great service. It is doing immense service because it is trying to put what is called the Indian knowledge system, what is now being used as the phrase Indian knowledge system, which is nothing else except putting into English the very simple thing, the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara or the Bharatiya Shastra Parampara or the Bharatiya Vangamaya. Vangamaya itself is a parampara, the Vangamaya Parampara. So it is primarily putting the whole tradition of thinking and living and performing together in the present context, but because we have, as a result of 250 or so years of British colonization, we have a formal discourse which is not our discourse, which continues with our education system, our training, our judiciary, our foreign service, partly our parliamentarian, because it contributes pretty much to their thinking, if not to their education. They don't go for education anyway, the parliamentarians and the legislators in our country. Don't worry much about education or formal education. It's not an eligibility condition anyway, so they can get away with it. But the thinking of the lawmakers, it, as you all know, is largely still colonial. I am not going to talk about that because we have done a lot of Aranyarodhan, as it is maybe called, we have wept in the woods a lot about it. So I am going to put things very straight, that the Indian knowledge system, or the Bharatiya Vangamaya, is there for the last 5 or 6 or 7,000 years, whatever dating you may want to do it. But now it is to be studied, and perforce so. It is to be studied, it is to be lived, it is to be understood in contrast with the Western system. You see, this is the new problem. This is the new situation, that you just can't do it as, say, people were doing it in, let us say, 5th century AD or even 10th century AD. I can't study the Shastra today just as Acharya Abhinav Gupta was doing. Of course, I study Acharya Abhinav Gupta. I try to get the picture of his times and try to understand the whole tradition through that. and through the teachers who have followed that parampara. But I must know how the West has not just interpreted Abhinavgupta for us or text for us, but what is the fundamental approach of what is called Indology. So as you know, that Indology was made to govern the colonies. It was made something which is going to define and redefine the colonized people, to tell them what they are, to lay down the laws for them, and then to govern them while the governments of the colonizers lasted. And as that impact still continues, and not only in India, in Africa and South America, everywhere, the problem of getting away from colonization is severe and it takes a long time. We have to very patiently do this task. So we have this before us and it is part of our daily life. And if Indian knowledge system is to be made use of, then there are some very, very specific areas in which we have to address the problem. Whether it is the problem of, let us say, allopathy versus Ayurveda, because allopathy is the dominant system of medicine in India, and Ayurveda is somewhere on the margins still. It is, in spite of all kind of advertisements by Baba Ramdev on television, in practice it is not something which we are constantly relying upon. Then there is this whole judicial system. We have a constitution which we today say very happily that I don't care for Manusmriti, I care for the constitution. This is something which I hear all the time from enlightened people. And there are some very traditional scholars also who sometimes say that now our Smriti is our constitution. Now these are the kinds of mistakes that we have made. And we have to understand that there is a huge difference between the Smriti, the whole Dharma Shastra, and the constitution. And if we have to get out of colonization, then we have to do a new constitution which is not connected but which is a modernization of the Dharma Shastra. And then there are so many other things like this ethnic division of India into linguistic states, into people living with certain practices, into religion, etc. Because making people into ethnic groups was the way the colonizers defined those who are to be governed. Now the Indian system does not look upon people that way. If you read the Dharma Shastras, if you read the Artha Shastras, there is no category of people that there are so many Bauddhas living in Bharatvarsha, there are so many Jainas living, how are you going to protect their rights? There are so many Vaishnavas living. You see, this kind of classification, the Sampradayic, or what is called in the German sociology as ethnicity, and which has come into modern sociology, and all sociology departments begin with this fundamental article of faith that people are ethnic people. They have taken this word from Greek ethnos, which only meant a jati or a tribe. It did not mean what it means today. But now it means this, that Punjabis are ethnic people, so this is a linguistic. Now this kind of thinking, this kind of classification of human beings or praja or people for governance is not the Indian system. The Indian state would have disappeared hundreds of years ago or maybe 1,000 years ago, in case our lawmakers had thought about this. So this is one problem that we have. Then the problem of justice. You see this whole question of nyaya versus dharma. Now nyaya, what is called justice, is based upon the enlightenment values of rights of the people, which is very different from the concept of dharma. So the state itself is based upon notions today which are not very much in synchronization with our traditional thought. For instance, I'll give you a very simple example. Today, it is the parliament, or in a communist country it is the Politburo, or in a capitalist country it is a set of certain big top businessmen who control the government. They are the lawmakers. But in India traditionally the Raja was not the lawmaker. राजा ने कभी भी स्मृतियों की रचना नहीं की थी. हाँ, मनु नाम के एक धर्मशास्त्र मिलता है और मनु राजा थे, लेकिन मनु के नाम से जो पूरी परंपरा है वो राजाओं की या क्षत्रियों के द्वारा लिखी कोई परंपरा नहीं है. In India, the king did not make laws. The king only observed laws. The people made laws. There was Shastrachar and there was Lokachar. And Shastrachar and Lokachar was the law which was implemented by the king. The king did not make laws. But today, it is the top government which makes laws for every damn thing. And then they have a set of lordships with them who are going to interpret that. And they are going to such an extent that they will decide how high is going to be such and such temple, or whether you are going to worship, or whether women can enter such and such temple or not. Now all this is something entirely different from our tradition. So you can see the huge gap which we have with our let us say 4,000 or 5,000 years of living and the present system. This system of course came under severe threat under Islamic rule, but then it continued as a parallel system to the Islamic theological system implemented by the king. Where it got entirely changed was at the point of time when the British took over and when Queen Victoria started making radical changes, and we had the law which was the British law, which more or less continues to this day. So this is an overall picture I have given you, and it is in the context of this that we have to think about art. You see, art is not something which you can think about in isolation. It is not an activity which is just meant for a short while, to relax after work, or not to distract you if you are eating your dinner somewhere in a mall. This is a function of art is not something so trivial. As a matter of fact, in all civilizations, civilizations which made a big mark in history, like the Egyptian, the Chinese, the Greek civilizations, the concept of art was something much more deeper. And in India, the concept of art was the deepest, the most extensive. And art was considered an essential part of every activity, small or big, that you did. The Greeks used to make a distinction between useful arts, everyday arts, called technique, and then arts of beauty or fine arts, which they call Kali technique. Those which have beauty in it, art which has beauty in it, Kali technique. And in Greece they still have that distinction between the useful art and the aesthetic art. But in India we didn't have this distinction because we wanted even the most useful thing to be beautiful. So it's in only our land that if you go into a very, very poor man's hut, I mean not in a modern shanty in Delhi or Calcutta or Chennai, but let us say if you go into a hut of Banjaras in Rajasthan, or if you go into Bishnoi house somewhere, which may be very poor, you will still have some homemade paintings on the wall. Nobody told them that if you make these, then tourists will come to see it. They were living their lifestyle. And because they're living their lifestyle, and all of a sudden somebody who came on a Fulbright grant from America saw that and then wrote an article, so 50 people come every week to see that hut. So in India, art was essential part of everyday activity. In the Gita it is said that yogaha karmasu kaushalam. Now you can simply say kala karmasu kaushalam. Because kala, of course, many people will say that kala is a yoga. And as a matter of fact, if you go deep into kala, then kala becomes a yoga. So what is the Bhagavad Vachan in Gita applies to art also. So if yoga is karmasu kaushalam, then kala is karmasu kaushalam, and kaushal is the real thing. But this kaushal finds a implementation with certain values. In the present day, what is the value of our constitution? I mean, what are the values enshrined in our constitution, given we the people of India and so forth? Well, it is something largely which follows the American Constitution, where happiness, happiness is the aim. Now, anybody who has some passing acquaintance with classical texts of India will tell you, no. Happiness, manoranjan or sukha is not the aim of life. The aim of life are dharma, artha, kam and moksha. Dharma, artha, kam, these are the three. Of course, moksha was added later and it is an extension of dharma. So happiness is not the aim. Happiness is not an end in itself. And then there are darshanas in India which say that what you call happiness is dukkha. So Buddha said that what you call sukha is actually dukkha. The Indian vision about the aim of life, whether Jain aim or Buddhist aim or Vaishnava or Shakt or Shaiva or whatever, it has always been in terms of Purusharthas, which is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So, the Indian Constitution should have the aim of life as Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. And it should also make a distinction between what is Nyaya, the world which is created on the concept of enlightenment notions of rights of the people, as compared to Dharma. Because Dharma is something which sustains you, and what sustains you is giving, not taking. So it is duty which sustains you, it is not rights which sustain you. Rights make a conflicting society, endless conflicting society, in which you live and you take grants from Ford Foundation to write your thesis on conflict and become a professor at sociology department. So, you see, what we are living and what we are doing is not something which helps us living our life. It only increases the conflict in India, and all modern sociology is meant to promote ethnic conflict in India so that India stays under control. And we as Indians have surrendered to it because we don't understand what is the Indian knowledge system in contrast with the colonial knowledge system. Coming back to art, what is the position of art? With which Purushartha is art associated? Is it associated with Dharma? Is it associated with Artha? Is it associated with Kama or with Moksha? Of course, nothing worldly can be associated, strictly speaking, with Moksha or the exclusive pursuit of Moksha, or what is called Nivritti. But in terms of Dharma, certainly art is associated with it. But art is rooted in Kama. The book which tells you how to live art and how to make use of art is the Kama Shastra. In last 4-5 years, I have given many lectures on the Kama Shastra, Vatsyayan's Kama Sutra. You can see my YouTube channel, and out of about 300 video lectures that you have there, you will be able to find about 10 or 15 lectures on Kama Sutra. Why did I have to go to Kama Sutra? Because the practical application of the Natya Shastra is found in Kama Sutra. भरत मुनि ने नाट्य वेद तो दे दिया, ब्रह्मा ने नाट्य वेद तो दे दिया, और भरत मुनि ने नाट्य शास्त्र लिख दिया और पूरी परंपरा बना। लेकिन किस समाज में ये नाट्य खेला जाना था? उस समाज के लोग कैसे होने थे? वहां कौन इसको पेट्रोनाइज करता? वहां नाट्य का प्रचार प्रसार करने के लिए किसका लक्ष्य था? अब मैं नाट्य को एक जेनेरिक टर्म्स ले रहा हूं जिसमें सारी आर्ट्स आ जाती हैं, पेंटिंग आ गई, स्कल्पचर आ गया, सब कुछ आ गया, सारी विद्याएं आ गई, आप जानते ही हैं। तो आर्ट्स को, नाट्य को प्रैक्टिकली कौन संरक्षण देगा? नागर देगा। और नागर क्या करेगा, कैसे करेगा, ये आपको नागर वृत्त कामसूत्र में मिलेगा। इसलिए नाट्यशास्त्र पढ़कर ये तो पता चल जाएगा कि नाट्य प्राचीन काल में कैसे होता था, लेकिन उसको संभव कौन करता था? Who made it possible for Natya to be performed? Performed in temples, performed in city square, performed in small places, big places. How was it possible? Because the patron was the man of taste, नागर। अब आज की तारीख में नागर गायब है, क्योंकि जवाहरलाल ने नागर नाम के जंतु के विषय में कुछ सुना नहीं था। जवाहरलाल जी ने कभी कामशास्त्र तो पढ़ा नहीं, ना हमारे गांधी बाबा ने, जिनकी आज पुण्यतिथि है। वो तो खजुराहो के ऊपर मिट्टी का लेप करवाने वाले थे, महात्मा गांधी। उनकी पुण्यतिथि पर यह कहना आवश्यक है कि खजुराहो पर वो चाहते थे कि मिट्टी का लेप हो जाए, कोई देखे नहीं उसको। तो आज वो नागर गायब है, क्योंकि नेहरूवियन मॉडल में जो आर्ट का पेट्रोनेज है वो सोवियत मॉडल से आया, कि सिटी की जो सेंट्रल स्टेट है वो सबको पेट्रोनाइज करेगा। वो दिल्ली में संगीत नाटक एकेडमी, दिल्ली में साहित्य एकेडमी, ललित कला वगैरह, IGNCA, इंदिरा गांधी नेशनल सेंटर ऑफ आर्ट्स, ये सब दिल्ली में होंगे और दिल्ली में ही सारी योजना बनेगी, कौन क्या कर सकता है, क्या नहीं कर सकता, फिर बाद में कौन पुरस्कृत होगा, कौन तिरस्कृत होगा, ये सब दिल्ली में स्टेट करेगा। तो प्राचीन काल में भी राजा देते तो थे पुरस्कार, मुस्लिम राजाओं ने भी दिया। अकबर ने तानसेन को सरस्वती कंठाभरणम का टाइटल दिया, पुरस्कार दिया, बीवियां दी, घर दिए। अब आजकल राजा ज्यादा कुछ नहीं देते, कागज का टुकड़ा देते हैं जिसको पद्मा अवार्ड कहा जाता है, जो आप अपने घर पर दीवार पे चिपका सकते हैं। इसके अतिरिक्त कुछ नहीं उसका लाभ है। धन किसी को नहीं दिया जाता शिष्य बनाने के लिए, तो क्योंकि समझ नहीं है हमें अपनी परंपरा की। लेकिन कामसूत्र तो कहता है कि ये काम एक नागर करेगा। नागर कौन है? वन हु हैज मेड मनी एंड हु इज लिविंग अ लाइफ ऑफ टेस्ट एंड हु इज नॉट अ प्ले बॉय। So he is going to promote art, and art will be promoted by all those women who are in the profession of number one arts and number two sexuality as a profession. तो ये एक पुरानी व्यवस्था में ये भी था। वहां सेक्स और आर्ट के बीच में एक दीवार नहीं थी। देखिए ये चीजें बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है समझने के लिए। इफ यू आर गोइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड द इंडियन यूज ऑफ आर्ट, देन यू आर गोइंग टू सी हाउ आर्ट वाज यूज्ड एट वेरियस लेवल्स। कला का जो प्रयोग था, अब जो मैं आपको कला के 4 लेवल्स बता रहा हूं भारत के अंदर प्रयोग के, दीज 4 लेवल्स ऑफ आर्ट which were to be used, these were levels of kama, of desire, of sexual desire, and of desire for good things of life. Now this, as you will see, is radically different from the Western notion of art. Whether by Western I mean those which begin with the Renaissance and which have a Christian background, not the Greek. The Greek is different. The Greek world was entirely different. The Greek world was an Indo-European world which shared many Vedic values with ancient India. It was a world of avatars. It was a world of gods coming on the earth. So it had a different use of art, perception of art. So let us see what is the use of kama and at what level. There is first of all at the level of the body, plain and simple satisfaction of the bodily desires including sexuality, in which the Kama Sutra provides you many kinds of things, especially in the Samprayogik Adhikarana, which has been translated into English and which most people think is the beginning and the end of Kama Sutra. All those fantastic postures and that is Kama Sutra. It is some kind of sexual gymnastics for the young. Now that is the physical level. But then Kama Sutra is talking about implementation of your Kama, your desire, and here Kama means everything which the senses feel gratified with, not just rati or sexuality. Then there is the level of marriage or having a relationship between man and woman, and that includes by implication between the third gender also, Tritiya Prakriti. So that is when you should wed and you should take a family and you should do grihastha activity. You should become a householder. And it is at this point that Kama Sutra makes it very clear that whatever you are going to do as an activity of the senses, of the body, of the pleasure, of physical pleasure, should never be against dharma and should never be against artha. One, if you are satisfying kama, then always keep dharma in mind. Don't do adharmic things and don't do things which bring financial ruin to you or which cause all kinds of problems in society. Do not harm. So this was the essential core of having grihastha. And then there was the aesthetic use of kama, which is the arts, where you have all the arts, painting, music, dance, etc. And along with this was associated the institute of Veshya or Veshmagraha, where sexuality on payment, or, well, that's a very crude translation of what may be called the Rupa Jivas of ancient times, or the Veshya Graha, that was something which was associated with the arts. Of course, this is something totally alien to the Christian mind. This is something totally alien to the Western mind as a whole. But this was something quite easily understood by the Greek or the Chinese or even the Japanese mind. But today, we don't. Today, under the Western impact, we think of art as entertainment. Art is not something which is for any higher purpose. And that brings me to the constant effort that the Western societies have made to question art. You see, they questioned art, therefore in the West there were debates like, is art instruction or is propaganda? Is it education or is it just some kind of narcissism? Should you have art for art's sake, or should you have art for the sake of social reform, including a Marxist revolution? These are all debates which happened in European society. These are all debates that happened in a Christian society, or a society which came out of Christianity into enlightenment but still retained all these debates. But in a Greek society, in an Indian society, there was no such debate, because you were constantly using art for beauty as well as daily life. In terms of Greek, techni and kalitechni. In terms of India, kala and kala kaushal, and the excellence of art. So everything simple will also be done in an excellent manner. There will be a touch of, even if you make a small deepak out of mud, clay, then you would like to beautify it and use it as something beautified. So you will not have the concept of something unbeautiful as useful. This is something which comes in with industrialization, but before that it comes in with this whole distinction between what is beautiful and what is not beautiful, and suspicion of the beautiful. So the Indian system has been at these three levels: the level of the body, the level of a societal application of art, then aesthetic application of art, and finally the fourth, which is art as a door to divinity. Art as something that leads you to the ultimate experience of what is beyond human experience. तो जो संगीत से या आहत नाद से अनाहत नाद की ओर आपको ले जाता है, वो भी तो संगीत ही है ना, वो भी तो कला ही है. सो दिस गोइंग बियॉन्ड, गोइंग टू द अल्टीमेट, this is something which is found in Indian art, Indian poetry, Indian poetics, Indian system of language all the time. अगर हम भाषा के बारे में सोचते हैं तो हम भाषा के बारे में केवल एग्जिस्टिंग लैंग्वेज ऑफ द टंग, ग्लोसा के बारे में नहीं सोचते, जिसको हमारी भाषा में वैखरी कहते हैं. तो वैखरी नहीं है, वैखरी के आगे मध्यमा है, पश्यंती है और परा है. तो हर वैखरी परा तक हमें ले जाएगी. जैसे आहत नाद, तबला है, सितार है, वीणा है, गायन है, कॉम्पोजिशन है, कृति है, बंदिश है, ये सब हमें दिव्य की ओर भी ले जाएंगे. अगर नहीं ले जाएंगे तो ये अधूरे हैं. And then the whole concept of rasa which was developed, that rasa is something which elevates you, which gives you an experience which your senses can never provide. Now this is very different from the materialistic approaches which were never evolved in India regarding art, but which comes all from the West. The materialistic approaches which have looked upon art as propaganda. So, when you come to Enlightenment period, then you find that most people think of art only as a vehicle of information. And in the 19th and the 20th century, they say art is a medium of social reform. So theatre becomes the theatre of Ibsen, theatre of George Bernard Shaw, where you discuss social revolution, where you discuss social change. Or in Germany, the theatre of Brecht, where the purpose of theatre is to bring in the Marxist revolution. और फिर भारत के अंदर नेहरूवियन पीरियड में सन 70 से व्याख्या शुरू हुई मार्क्सिस्टों की, रोमिला थापर एंड इरफान हबीब एंड ऑल दीज पीपल हु लुक्ड अपॉन हिस्ट्री, पोइट्री, पुराण, एवरीथिंग only as a medium of propaganda or Brahmanavad. Because for them art is something which is propagandist. एक मत को प्रस्थापित करने के लिए, it is for establishing a certain ideology. Natyashastra does not talk of any ideology. Natyashastra does not say that theatre and by implication any other art is good only for Vaishnavas or only for suras and not for asuras. पहले ही अध्याय में ब्रह्मा कह देते हैं कि चरित्र दिखाना है, कर्म दिखाना है, कर्म का फल दिखाना है, अच्छे कर्म का फल दिखाना है. चाहे दानव भी वो फल कर रहा है अगर अच्छा, तो हम दिखाएंगे. This problem is taken care of there. It's not associated with a denomination or with a political theory. This was very well settled in India very early. And that is the fundamental notion of art, that art is an elevating experience. अब आज आप देख रहे हैं कि जो हमको वेस्टर्न मॉडल्स दिए गए हैं उनमें इसका ठीक विपरीत है. एंड अगेन आफ्टर एवरी 50 years they come up with a ideology which is actually some kind of a social engineering and which wants to use art for the purpose of social engineering. तो आपने लेट 19th century में देखा कि एक थिएटर आया जो सोशल रिफॉर्म चाहता था, इब्सन का, जॉर्ज बर्नर्ड, बाद में आगे चलकर जॉर्ज बर्नर्ड शॉ वगैरह हुए. तो वेस्ट में वो पूरा मूवमेंट चला रियलिस्टिक थिएटर का। इसी तरह से आर्ट के अंदर मूवमेंट तो नहीं चल पाया था। आर्ट में तो there was a conflict about this right from the early romantic times. But in England and in Europe, they had this big debate in the 18th century itself, where the rationalists wanted to propagate certain good ideas, classical ideas so-called, and the romantics wanted to oppose them. But this whole conflict continues, and it continues in the 20th century. It has a set of people who think that art is something for deeper experience. So you have existentialists, you have people who, like Jean-Paul Sartre, or absurdists who rebel against it. But then you have on the other side all the Marxists and the Marxist theoreticians who establish that it is for promoting a particular idea of a state for which art is to be used. And now, in the last 5 years, after coming out of this muddle of what is called post-structuralist thought, they have come into the latest baby out of the labor room is wokeism and cancel culture. So it's one of the most straightforward enforcement of ideology, that if you don't believe that Nazis, Hindus and white supremacists are to be banned from the face of earth, then we will cancel you. I have given you in 2 lines the whole theory. And these are the people now who want to use art for that purpose. And this is now the disruptive theory of art which has come in. And it is a big danger to Indian system. Why? Because instead of allowing people to pursue art along the lines which they have done for thousands of years in this country, it wants to break the artists themselves into small sections and fragments and give them identities so they can serve other masters. So they want to classify musicians not as musicians, not as good musicians, great musicians, innovative musicians, but musicians who are towing the Brahminical line or who are seeking freedom from Brahminism. So there are controversies about what is dance. Who were the Devadasis? How was dance Brahminized by great scholars like Raghavan and Music Academy, and how all that effort should now be changed into some kind of a revolution by the Dalits, led by T.M. Krishna and people like that. So the whole focus and the whole purpose of what was art is being taken into serving the interest of certain social engineers and political philosophies. This is one of the major attacks on the concept and use of art in present time in India today. Now there are many things that I can talk about, but what I would say is that I would like to take up questions from you, and maybe in answering your questions I'll be able to address some of the issues that have come out of this. So thank you so much for a very patient listening. I'm very grateful. Well, you have a question on a comparison of ancient Greek and Indian art and Indian theatre. Well, for theatre you can read my book, Dramatic Concepts, Greek and Indian, and you will find a lot of material. But art in general, if I were to say, you see, in both these cultures, sculpture, painting, music, dance, even gymnasium, that is physical exercise, kasarat, what is called gym today, but which is a Greek word, gymnasium. So all these were associated with the temple complex. There were, of course, gymnasium was there to visit every day in the morning, because every young Greek boy who was not a slave, he went for exercise and then for a bit of education at the gymnasium. But arts were associated with the temple. And theatre in ancient Greece was always done at the festival of a god in the temple premises, where the amphitheatre was also made. So this is one big similarity. In India, theatre was not always in the temple. In India, theatre had a very, very wide application, from street theatre to theatre at the royal court and temples and many places. But the overall concept of theatre as a sacred activity, as something which is leading to a higher perception of things, that is absolutely common. Because theatre was not just for entertainment. Pathak sir just mentioned about Bollywood. Now, this is mass consumption material, so they don't go for much of depth study or depth experience. They go for quick things. But art in ancient times, of course, there was always what was called adhama kala, or something which was very ordinary. But the notion was to create excellence, and that creation of the excellence was only when you thought of something higher than yourself. That's why you think of characters which are higher than yourself. So this was common to the Indian and the Greek perception. Your question is largely, if I may rephrase it, is how to revive the Indian art and make it more relevant, and make it something which can be widely accepted, though not kind of brought down in quality. Now, whenever a tradition is revived, it requires two things. Number one, a knowledge of parampara, or what has been in the nation and the country earlier. And number two, an open mind and the desire to create and innovate. The Indian Shastras concentrate upon the idea of creating something new, creating something naveen, creating something different. Something which is, if you go to a traditional guru of Hindustani music, then he will always say, साहब ये हमारी उपज है, हमको ये मिला गुरुओं से, हमने उस्तादों से, अपने गुरुओं से ये सीखा, लेकिन ये अब हमारी उपज है, मतलब ये मैंने बनाया है, and they value it, and everybody else value that their upaj. So this whole concept of taking the tradition and then making new things out of that, this is something very important. Unfortunately, right from 19th century, we got involved with an over preoccupation with Western forms, and we thought that to imitate them and to do something very good only in their form was the best thing, or the order of the day. So Jaishankar Prasad wrote a play, Skandgupt, which was largely patterned after European model of Shakespeare, etc. And then Western theatre became urban theatre all over India. beginning with Bengal, going to Bombay and various other parts of metropolitan. So today we have a big break between urban theatre in India, which is largely something which inherits the modern 19th, 20th century tradition of European realism, and on the other hand we have outside the cities the so-called traditional theatre of Kathakali, Kudiyattam, Bailata, Bhavai, etc., etc., Baul. So this gap should now be filled. And this can be filled now only by innovation, not by patchwork, or not by something which is just sloganeering, but by very creative, actual thinking. And it can be done. And there are examples of it, and some very successful examples. So this is my comment. I gave you the answer that wokeism should be treated as something which works or may work for America. We should not try to first of all import it as some kind of a social engineering system in India, first. And secondly, one should try to understand that we are not going to serve any ideology through art, whether the ideology is foreign or even Indian. You see, ideology means that you are serving somebody who is non-artistic. You are serving a lobby either of money makers, or you are serving a lobby of power brokers or of a political party. If you start serving that through art, then art simply cannot be good art ever. So that's the first principle. I am not going to the extent of saying art for art's sake, because art for art's sake was itself a very peculiar kind of thing which belonged to Europe. Art is for sake of the four purusharthas. That's the simple Indian thing. So there are ways of making art creative and deliver social good as well. Because Natya Shastra was created to re-establish dharma. And dharma does not mean ideology. There's a difference between dharma and ideology, or a given political ideology. Many people will come around and say, no, Natya Shastra was created by Brahmins, it was created to elevate Brahmins, that's why it was called the fifth Ved, and the people like Girish Karnad, they all propagated that the artist or the Natya Shastra man was against the Vedas. वो उनका नाटक है Agni or Barkha, something like that, where he has propagated these things. But that's far from the truth, I don't think these people had any understanding of classical India. Otherwise, Girish Karnad would not have made that kind of a film, Utsav, in which he sends the courtesan back to the brothel. Our ancient Shudrak was far more liberal. He made her into a Kulavadhu. He made her into a great respectable wife. But Girish Karnad sent her back to the brothel. अब आप खुद समझ लीजिए कि कौन enlightened है. तो आप ये विजन रखिए, इंडिपेंडेंस रखिए, अपना दिमाग लगाइए, and art will flourish. Where you have put very beautifully the problem that art has been made just into a subject to be studied, unconnected with the rest of the education. I congratulate you for putting it so succinctly and beautifully. How to remedy it? Don't teach about art, but let from primary class children practice art. Let art not be a subject to be studied in books and regurgitated in exams, but let children be taught how to recite a poem, how to make some painting, how to do a small play in class 4, class 5, how to do a full play on a story which is local to your village or your nearby place, and how to perform it. That should be your curriculum also. And let that be done. Maybe just for 2 months, once in class 8 and once in class 9. That's all. And some other artistic activity which is done under the supervision of a proper teacher. Now this can all be done. This is no rocket science or something to be imported at heavy cost. It's something easy. There are hundreds and thousands of artists all over India who are willing to be employed in this kind of a thing. So practice art and make that part of education. Unfortunately, this has not happened because no education policy, including the present so-called new education policy, has made any place for it. You see, that whole committee had nobody from arts. There were 11 people headed by a rocket science man, Kasturi Rangan, but there was no artist in his team of 12 people. There was no musician, there was no Sanskrit poet, there was no painter, nobody. So how would you get an input of art and how to make use of art in society? And I even wrote a whole representation to the Prime Minister right in the beginning. But I don't know if the Prime Minister got to see it.